Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Dali Katan. I am the founder and CEO of Presently. We are a group gifting platform that makes it easy for family and friends to collaborate on a single gift and celebrate the people that they love in the moments that matter. You can feel free to check us out at getpresently.com. So we're super excited today to host our first parents event with Jacob Schatz. Jacob is a doctoral candidate at NYU studying developmental psychology. We'll be discussing the topics of early childhood development and play. Jacob, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. I'll share a quick bio and then we can kind of go through some housekeeping notes and I'll hand it off to you. So Jacob Schatz is a doctoral candidate at New York University. He's studying how children learn by playing with objects and adults. He's a teacher and camp counselor at heart, fascinated by children's minds at work as they play. And when he's not conducting research, he writes stories and songs with and for kids.
All right. Hello, everyone. As Dahlia said, my name is Jacob Schatz. I have been working with kids pretty much my entire life. My mom is a preschool director. My dad sings songs for kids and has been doing bar mitzvahs since well before I was 13. And so my whole life has been centered around working with kids. And that brought me into plenty of work while I was at Princeton, studying developmental psychology, and then working at Temple University. I worked at a Head Start and at the Please Touch Museum in Philadelphia, which is a playful learning museum. And then finally brought me to New York, where I am in the midst of my PhD, now officially a doctoral candidate, so I pretty much have just my dissertation to go. And I've been fascinated by how kids learn on their own. My thesis at Princeton was how children learn from educational stories and educational narratives, and how that depends on what's in the narrative, whether it's goofy or more serious, or involves fiction and fantasy, or is bound to reality. And after that, I realized that kids were engaged with the stories for sure, but kids were mostly engaged by the way that I was telling the story. And it made me wonder about what children would learn if I just gave them the story to read on their own. These were preschool aged kids, weren't really reading yet, and what was the learning available to them with me versus without me? And that got me much more interested in seeing how adults, parents especially, but teachers and even older siblings can boost their child's learning and their motivation to learn and their approaches to learning. So that's taken me on many different paths, and I will pretty much walk you through a lot of the research that I've done up until this point. Mostly the findings. I'm not gonna say this is what I did. This is, these are the methods. These are things like that. Obviously, you can email me for those things. At the end, we'll send out my email address as well, so that if you want to read the research that I've done and also the research that I'm referencing while we discuss today, I can send you that. And then at the end, I have just a bunch, like a list of a bunch of toys and games and activities that we can do with our kids, particularly during COVID, when we're all when we feel stuck at home, and for the most part are stuck at home. So I will jump in, but another thing that I'm going to say is please feel free to unmute yourself, I think, if you can, and ask me any questions, most of which hopefully I will have the answer for, or at least can hopefully point you in the right direction to answer those yourselves. And I will try to keep the chat open here just in case anyone writes anything in there. So another disclaimer, a lot of the things I'm going to say today um, may come as common sense. And the reason for that is because if they weren't common sense, then it would be really hard to raise children, and we wouldn't have, 7 billion people in the world right now. So we are naturally good at rearing and raising children across cultures, across communities, and everyone has a different style. And so what I'm going to say does come as common sense to many people, but a lot of it is just the research to back it up. And sometimes if we don't think about it and reflect on it in a deeper way, then we forget how naturally it can come to us to engage our children and help them learn and play. So most of my work is on playful learning. And a lot of the sort of the education sphere would have you think that play is one thing and learning is another. And that sometimes they butt heads, right? You cut into kids' recess time so that they can finish their math workbooks, things like that. There's recent research talking about how kindergarten is becoming, quote unquote, the new first grade because music and art and play are being taken out and substituted for math and reading and literacy and learning, which are all very important things. But my line of work is trying to integrate those two ideas to understand how learning happens through play, particularly in early childhood, but I would argue across the lifespan, um, and think about it as learning through play as opposed to learning versus play. So children learn from different skills and learn different skills and knowledge from all sorts of different types of objects and activities. So when a child plays with blocks or a shape sorter or nesting cups, they're learning spatial skills. Things like this goes in that, this one is smaller than that, this one can go on top of, this is heavier, this is lighter. They also learn math skills from counting the blocks, things like that. When children play with books, they're learning literacy skills. When children play with pretend kitchens and dolls, they're learning they're learning how to plan complex events and pretend new things and delve into the mind of someone else, which is important for later social communication. So playing with all sorts of different objects and playing in different activities helps children learn vast new skills and knowledge. And all objects, as the parents in here probably know, all objects are learning opportunities, or at least exploratory opportunities, which you can probably tell from your kids fiddling with just about anything they can get hands on. So I've done many observations of kids in their home, 1 to 2 years old, with their parents, and one kid spent 30 minutes with an air conditioner, just pressing the button on and off, literally just that. And that is, in a way, a learning opportunity. They're learning causality. They're learning their own agency, that if they push a button, something turns on. So they learn everything from opening and closing doors to drawers to everything. Tupperwares. I've seen kids carry around Tupperwares for hours on end. So that's all fine and dandy, but many of those learning opportunities, many of the best learning opportunities are hidden from children. And parents are there to help them find and unlock those learning opportunities. So this is a classic idea that comes from this researcher, Lev Vygotsky. a Russian researcher. His stuff wasn't published until the 70s. And he had this notion of scaffolding, where children have this, think of it as concentric circles. So in the smallest circle is what the child already knows. And then in the next concentric circle is what the child can achieve to learn uh, through their own play, just playing on their own, things that they can unlock, knowledge and skills that they can learn on their own by playing. And then the last concentric circle is the zone of proximal development. It is the zone of learning and skills that children can acquire with someone else, particularly with a more knowledgeable adult. And that adult is usually a parent. Um, and, and then quickly becomes teachers as well. But parents are lifetime teachers. And the idea of bringing a child out of what they know and what they can learn on their own into this zone of proximal development, learning things that they couldn't achieve on their own, that process is called scaffolding. And it's providing children with the amount of support that they need, just the right amount of support that they need to then learn. And we'll talk a little bit more later about just the right amount of support and what that means. So before I continue, does anyone have any questions about that? That was all pretty broad and vague, but does anyone have any questions? All right. So the way that I look into, and the way that I've been researching scaffolding and bringing children into the zone of proximal development is through this idea of joint engagement. And joint engagement, again, is pretty common sense, but joint engagement is really the interaction between parents and kids around an object or activity that unlocks those learning opportunities and really helps them learn and achieve new things on their own. So joint engagement scientifically refers to whenever a parent and child are focusing on the same object or activity together, and they coordinate many different behaviors. So you may not even realize, but your eyes are shifting back and forth from the object to the child, and theirs are doing the same. You may be using gestures. I use a lot of gestures. You may be providing a lot of rich language input. And beyond those things, which are the classic things that developmental researchers think about, is what are they doing with their hands and what are they doing with their language. Being close to your child is important. They focus better when they know that you're right there. And that close proximity actually opens up for a whole different kind of joint engagement, which is called biobehavioral synchrony. And especially with the youngest kids, biobehavioral synchrony is really important because when parent and child are in close proximity and often in skin-to-skin contact, they are able to co-regulate their body temperature, their heart rate, their stress hormone release, which is incredibly important, as we all know, and even their brain waves. So when parents and children are engaging together in the same object or activity, their brains are actually synced up, which aids the flow of communication and allows children to learn better. So we think of, all of these toys that are being marketed to parents as educational, especially educational apps and things like that now that are supposed to benefit our kids. But the most benefit that they can get is being with you, because that brings them into that zone of learning where most of that learning happens. So just gathering my notes here. Yeah, so my own research on joint engagement recently actually did a brand spanking new findings, and you're actually not going to be able to find them in a published paper yet. But my own research has recently found that kids play for longer durations and in more complex ways when they are playing with their parents than when they are playing alone. And that's incredibly important, because if we go back to my original point that children learn from any object and any activity, and they learn all sorts of new things, that doubles when they play in complex ways. And that is even more actualized when they play for longer durations. And so the parent is really the one scaffolding the child right there to learn. And that's highly important. So, any questions now?
I have a question. I'm curious if it's the parent relationship that causes that, or if it's the other human being relationship. Like if it was a stranger that was playing with the child, or a teacher that was playing with the child who didn't have that level of intimacy and familiarity, would it have the same benefit?
That's a really good question. So my research is only looking at parents so far, but I've always hoped to bring my research to teachers and to older siblings. Um, According to scaffolding, the idea of scaffolding, it can be any more knowledgeable individual. So to an extent, it's anyone. If there is a person engaging that child and keeping them on task in sort of a nice way and sort of a comforting way, or following their lead if they want to switch to something new. If there is someone there to engage them and the activity that they are doing, that makes the activity more meaningful, more minds on, and heightens the potential for them to learn the many things that that object or activity has to offer. Yeah. So the parent advantage, I would say, is in, so there's another idea in scaffolding, that that it's about where the child is now, right? So to scaffold a child effectively, you have to know what their knowledge is, what their base knowledge state is. So the most effective scaffolders are the people who are intimately aware of where that child is and what that child knows and can or cannot do. So that is one parent advantage for sure. I would say that in when it comes to ideas of biological synchrony, a lot of those things happen way early in infancy, and so parents are kind of locked in with their kids in sort of those biological rhythms. Whereas it might be a little bit more difficult for a different adult, someone who hasn't been around the child, someone like an experimenter like me just coming into the house, um, can't achieve that biological synchrony as easily. Um, yeah, but that's a good question. Does anyone have any more questions?
I have a question. Hi, Jacob.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the research suggests that it's beneficial or most beneficial for a child to be always co-playing, or if there is, like, what's the balance between independent play, solo play, sort of like self-talk playing and things like that, and doing that along with an adult for the scaffolding benefit.
Sure. So scaffolding is, yeah, it's particularly useful to bring children to a higher level of play. And the greatest part about scaffolding, just like scaffolding, the reason it's called scaffolding, just like scaffolding on a building, is that as the building is built, the scaffolding is taken away. So as the infant becomes, or child becomes, more capable in playing in that way, then the parent can sort of recede a little bit and give the child more space to play on their own. And I will talk about free play in a little bit. It comes into play with other concepts. But yes, free play is also important. But if we're talking about efficient learning, efficient learning of knowledge and of concepts, that is best done in co-play. there are definitely important skills built in free play that I will discuss soon. Yeah, Christina.
Um, is I guess what are the repercussions if you know of not being there with your child, like in the sense of, is it like doubly effective to be there with a young child, and in the case of if you're not there with the child, say like, you know, you're a working parent type of thing, like is it damaging in that sense to the child, and especially in these days, as you said, with like all of these educational games? And then I can't remember if you said this in terms of like what age range, like, you know, is it up to 6 or up to 5, or, you know, what age range is important?
Sure. I would say that preschool age is, and this is mostly conjecture, but around the time that the child starts elementary school or kindergarten, is when the child can begin uh, to sort of do things on their own, and that the sort of disadvantages of not having someone there are no longer at issue. Um, the thing, though, is that I would say the caveat is that there is no shame to be felt um, by working parents. Working parents are actually, there's a good amount of research that shows that the amount of time that you spend with your child is actually not necessarily highly correlated with whether or not you're a working parent. So those really, really crucial moments of learning can still happen as a working parent. And working parents in particular um, tend to come home with brand new ideas and a new way of understanding their child, such that uh, that's why people think about the additive benefit of having a parent at home and a parent who works, um, because having a parent at home is, there's someone who understands the child's babbling and what the child wants pretty much at all times, but doesn't necessarily push the child as much as a parent who doesn't understand the child, everything that the child needs. So a parent comes home and the child is asking for something, and the parent actually encourages, a working parent actually encourages a child to be able to communicate themselves better, and to communicate their internal states and understand others' internal states better. So it's, I wouldn't say that there's a disadvantage as much as differences. And kids around the world are growing up um, well, uh, for all intents and purposes, with different parenting strategies. I mean, there are communities where parents don't believe that they should interact with their child. Like truly, their child is supposed to observe and learn and speak when spoken to, and those kids grow up fine. Um, so there is a little bit of leeway there. I would always encourage that, if you're around and your child is playing, there are so many learning opportunities um, for your child if you join in. But another thing that is important is for children's development, more so than just like learning the content from, you know, some random toy because their parent is there, is learning that there are people in their lives who love them. And no doubt, no matter how a person engages their child in play and in learning, as long as your child feels loved and supported, they're gonna grow up to be just fine. In a manner of speaking. I mean, there are plenty of places in the world where there are tremendous issues that belabor parents and children alike, and I don't mean to belittle those, but in a vacuum, what matters most is the child feeling supported and loved. And this idea of attachment holds very, very strong. And if anyone wants me to go dive a little bit into attachment, that's sort of left field of what I particularly research, but I'm happy to talk about it if others would like me to. All right. So barring any other questions, I will move on. All right, great. So this might help a little bit with the flip side of the co-play idea. So I've been talking up, play with your child, play with your child, play with your child. That's how they learn. But there's another end of that extreme, where if parents or teachers overwhelm their kids with too many toys and too much talk or too much involvement, children will actually play in less sophisticated ways. So in the manner of too many toys, children will actually just bounce around from one toy to another without feeling the need to maintain their focus on one activity. And so I think that this is where my work particularly aligns well with the mission of Presently, which is to demonstrate and indicate that it's not the quantity, it's the quality, and it's the quality of the interaction with that object or in that activity or with that toy that builds learning and development. And the quantity taken to an extreme, if there are too many toys, it can actually harm a child's learning from those objects, particularly if there is no parent involved. So this is where we get back to Abby's mentioning of free play or independent play, where if a child is playing on their own and there are plenty of toys around, they're just going to hop around. But co-play will help them dive in and play for longer durations and get more out of their play. That said, free play does have its benefits, and I will get there in just a moment. Now, when parents direct their kids and direct their play too much, kids lose their sense of agency. And agency is very important when it comes to child learning and child play. And that's where we begin to understand the importance of free play. So if kids just let parents take the wheel, if a parent is just doing all the things for the kid, they're putting all the blocks on, they're connecting all the Legos, they're like, here, do it this way, do it this way, do it that way. If they're overwhelming their child, then the child is just going to let their parents take the wheel. They're gonna resign themselves to little agency, and they'll sit back, and that'll become that might still have some effect for learning, but it will not necessarily be play anymore. And so that brings us to this concept that was being developed while I was at Temple University in Philadelphia. And that concept is the playful learning spectrum. So the playful learning spectrum ranges from free play, which is completely independent, child-driven, which has high child agency, but low instructional value relatively. And on the other end of that play spectrum is direct instruction, which looks more like classroom learning, and is very low agency. The child doesn't have much agency in what they're doing because they're being told what to do pretty much the entire time, told what to do, told what to think, but high instructional value. So that's the most efficient way for a child to learn, but it's no longer play. Now, agency is important. Bringing back to agency, it comes from this theory called self-determination theory, which states that children's motivation to learn and to grow and to do things of their own accord comes from a feeling that they can. So this motivation is built upon the idea that the child has agency to do things themselves. So that's why agency is important, because it builds a child's motivation to learn. When parents are no longer there, we want our kids to be motivated to learn and to grow and to explore and to make mistakes, because those things will help our children grow into well-rounded adults. So agency plays a big role when it comes to playful learning. So direct instruction, it's like classroom learning. Free play is very useful for children building self-regulation and agency. So it's good to have a little bit of direct instruction, and it's good to have a little bit of free play. And a lot of those things kids can get when they're in school, right? Recess is free play. And in preschool, and I think in a lot of kindergarten still, there are zones. So kids go zones or sections where kids go and can just play on their own if they're in a specific zone or section, like the block section or the kitchen section, things like that. So those are both important, and a lot of them happen at school and should continue to happen at school, because both are important. But right at the balance of child agency and the instructional value of an activity is this concept called guided play. And guided play brings us all the way back to scaffolding, because guided play is, and joint engagement, actually, because guided play is when a parent jointly engages their child during play or around a play object, which, as I said, can be truly anything, and scaffolds their child's learning during that playful experience. So guided play is this intersection of learning and play. It's the gold standard, and it builds upon scaffolding and joint engagement, and children do learn things that they couldn't have learned on their own during guided play. So actually, before I move on, does anyone have any questions about anything I've said? Alrighty. So adjacent to the research on guided play has been this research on educational apps, which is, already rampant. And my advisor, Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, published this article that says that playful experiences, and especially, well, this was in the context of playful learning apps or educational apps, playful learning experiences should be active, meaningful, engaging, and interactive. And people added on to those things that hopefully they would be iterative and joyful too. And I'm going to talk about all of those things now. So by active, the authors meant that the play should be minds on. It should have the child engaging the substance of the activity and not just passively experiencing it. So as a good example, some of the gold standards of educational children's television are Dora the Explorer and Blue's Clues and Sesame Street. And the reason that those are so powerful and were so effective and are so effective in teaching children and conveying learning in a fun and playful way is First of all, because they all included developmental research. All of their episodes were developed in tandem with developmental researchers and education researchers. So they were research backed. But there was this other aspect that it engaged the child in a way that their mind was always working. It's not passive. It's not passive television that they're just going to watch. It's active. It's getting them involved in the learning and the viewing. And that brings us to one of the other concepts, which is engaging. And so, I'm not saying that you should have a child, sit with, I don't know if kids like Lincoln Logs anymore. I thought those were boring from day one. Maybe other people think otherwise, but compared to Legos and other like fun Magnetiles, these fun building experiences, there were these Lincoln Logs, and those were not engaging. And so I never played with them as a kid. And I don't think I've ever seen a child play with Lincoln Logs. But I may be wrong. But that is my anecdotal example of engaging. That it shouldn't be boring. It absolutely, the experience shouldn't be boring for the child. The other two ideas were that playful learning should be meaningful and interactive. Now, we've been talking a lot about the interactive part, and the interactive part is you. It's the parent, it's the teacher, it's the auntie or the older sibling. Now, meaningful. There's something interesting about play and playful learning being meaningful. And for one, play is immediately made more meaningful by the interaction of the parent. So when you get involved, you are demonstrating to your child that this is a meaningful activity to get involved in, right? So if you're always there when they are building with their Legos, or if if a lot of the time you're there, or if you're asking them questions about what they did that day or what they're going to do the next day, these are the things that teach our children what is meaningful to them. And an example I use, sort of on the flip side of that, is here in New York. I see some parents engaging their children on the subway, and that's wonderful and great. And I see some parents who are just way too tired to be doing that. And so their child is, playing with an educational app, and that's fine. And then I see other parents who are just on their phone. And they could be checking emails, they could be texting a friend, they could be playing Candy Crush. But their child is still learning something there. And their child is learning that the most important thing is the cell phone. And what they're going to glean, they're always learning. What they're going to glean from those kinds of interactions and experiences is that cell phones are important. And then you're going to get kids latched onto cell phones and televisions and brightly lit screens. And while there are ways for children to learn from those screens, like I mentioned, Dora the Explorer and Blue's Clues and Sesame Street, if the screen is just there to keep them captivated, if the blinking lights are just there to keep them quiet, children will actually not develop the self-regulation that they need to become active and motivated learners. And so what we I'm sure many of us have heard about and talked about how, screens make kids lose their attention spans. And while there's kind of minimal evidence on that right now, um, there is a definite concern that this could affect self-regulation. And part of that is holding your attention to something for a long time. So I kind of went on a tangent about educational apps there, but it's important to realize that there are plenty of toys and apps and experiences out there that will call themselves educational, and you can't necessarily rebut that, because those experiences can be educational, and they can be useful for kids, but it's about having someone there who can help them digest what is educational and what is useful, as opposed to just the blinking lights. So another word on playful learning experiences being meaningful. Meaningful means the things that kids are interested in doing, the things that kids think are important for life. And as I already said, one aspect of that is that parents show their kids what's meaningful and important for life. And that was my example with the cell phone. But there's also other research, very interestingly, that shows that kids, these kids were interviewed around 3, 4, and 5 years old, I think, and they were asked if they would rather pretend play any sort of situation versus do the real thing. And I think 8 times out of 10, except for when it was like take the trash out, they said, I'd like to do the real thing. Now, some of these activities in the research were like, would you rather pretend to bake a cookie or actually bake a cookie? And obviously children would like to actually bake a cookie, because then that means they can actually eat the cookie. But what it shows us is that kids are highly motivated to do the things in real life that their mentors, that their parents and the people that they look up to are doing. So one thing, it's not common necessarily in America, but one thing across the world is that many kids from a young age start cooking with their parents. And so long as it is safe, I actually highly recommend it as an activity, because you're not only teaching your child something that they can take with them for the rest of their lives, but they are doing it with you, and they're learning that that's a meaningful experience, and they're learning so much along the way. And to them, cooking, just making dinner with you, is play. And I hope that I've argued that well enough, but I would love to talk about that more if I haven't. So all of that said, because I would like to leave time for questions, and I have this whole long list of ideas for activities and fun games and stuff. But all of that said, when kids play on their own, they are developing their self-regulation, and they're developing their ability to do things on their own, which is, as we all know, very important. And when kids are learning, and they might be learning on Zoom for this semester or for the year, they're also learning, and they're being taught something by their teachers, and that is important. And we need to continue to encourage that. But when they're playing with you, they open just a world of opportunities for learning and for development, and the most important of which is learning that they're supported and loved. So I've pretty much gone through my presentation notes. But again, I'm happy to send anyone the articles that I was sort of tacitly citing for your further reading, as well as talk about it further with you all. So now we can open up. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was so helpful. Oh, Abby, go ahead.
Yeah, just so I saw a lot of the people here are parents. I'm a preschool teacher. And so just looking from that perspective at what you were saying is one of the things that I think I've struggled with most in talking with parents is talking about the value of play and what they're learning. And so cooking, I think, is a great example that when we talk about those things like that with parents, we talk about how like the kids are learning math skills because they're using measuring cups and they're figuring out how many quarter cups are in the one cup. And they're also learning hand-eye coordination, like how do you carry the cup of flour into the bowl and dump it. And so making those connections from play as learning from a teacher mind to a parent mind, I think is the part that often gets lost in what I've seen of like, we have a lot of parents who are like, but is my kid going to be ready for kindergarten? We're like, yes, your kid will be fine. Like the whole point is that all of these things that they're doing, if it's pretend play, it's fantasy play, not only are they imitating things that they see in real life or learning how to be nurturing caregivers, for example, when they're doing pretend play in the kitchen or with dolls, but they're also learning these concrete skills that are building, like you mentioned at the beginning, the foundations of literacy or of math or of science. If they're on a seesaw, like they're understanding how leverage works, and all of these things that they'll then have this sort of innate understanding of when they, in 9th or 10th or 11th grade, like actually learn the math, etc. behind it. And that was one of the things that so I did this like psych PD this year, like really made an impression to me of recognizing the tangible skills that kids are learning from each play environment.
Yeah, that's great. And where a lot of those things that they learn on the playground sort of seep into their minds, and in 10th grade when you learn about leverage, you're like, oh, like a seesaw. You haven't been on a seesaw in years, but well, maybe. But you have that in mind. The thing that brings that even more to the fore is the parent involvement. So parents can help make those connections and connect those dots, so that it's less upon kids to do that when they can't, when it's beyond their reach. But you're absolutely right, Abby. So I'll answer this question in the chat. At what age does meaningful play begin? I have a newborn, and besides tummy time, play is limited. What age does play begin? It would be great if you could ask. Thanks. Okay. So the first year of life is a very interesting and exciting time. And newborns are learning a vast number of things. Newborns learn, supposedly, there's many people suggest it's hard to calculate this, but children learn more in the first 3 years of their lives than we learn for the rest of our lives combined. Children are learning how to see in the first 6 weeks. They're learning that there's something beyond themselves, that there are concrete objects that have different textures and different flavors and look different and have different sizes, and go together with other things. So I think the most impactful play that happens around the newborn months of life is face-to-face. And so around 6 to 9 months, kids begin to jointly engage their parents. So then that becomes parent, child, and object. But before that, and they're going to explore tons of objects, especially 3 to 6 months and well beyond that. But in those first few months, it's all about that face-to-face time. It's all about them hearing your voice and feeling your heartbeat and feeling your skin against theirs and things like this that really matter for a child to develop a healthy attachment, as well as to develop what I was talking about earlier, which is these biological rhythms, because parents actually help their child's body get into a good rhythm of all sorts of things, heart, temperature, stress hormone release, things like that. So tummy time is great. Tummy time is great, and face-to-face time is great. And as your child babbles, you can babble back a little bit. I'm sure you are. Um, and so just holding and being together and uh, and enjoying each other's time is play enough for a newborn. No problem. Does anyone have any other questions? Otherwise, I can just start running through this list of things. Some of these toys I want myself.
I'd love to hear them, actually. We're always looking for great ideas for parents, for kids of all ages. So we'd love to hear your suggestions.
Sure. So first and foremost, some of these things, so I have some great ideas that I absolutely love, and then there are a bunch of things to fill the list out. But we need kids moving, and especially in COVID, it's hard to get that to happen, because going outdoors and team sports, those things are less frequent, if at all. So my favorite that I've heard of recently, and I'm sure many parents know about it already, for getting kids moving, is Go Noodle. GoNoodle.com is this just kids dance site, and they have like these dance classes, and your kid just dances along with people on this on this website. It is adorable, and so I highly recommend that. There are also there's this Cosmic Kids Yoga. So if you want your kid less dancing and more yoga-ing, you can try Cosmic Kids. And then there are a couple other movement ideas. In terms of digital games, because I know that, getting your kid in front of a screen is, as much for your own sanity as it is for anything else. And so I'm sure a lot of parents have heard of ABC Mouse, which is amazing. They have plenty of really well-designed games, particularly for learning math and reading. And then two others that I like a lot are actually Minecraft, which is for a little bit older crowd. But Minecraft teaches the basics, actually, of computer programming and of architecture. So you're getting kids to build things that they couldn't build anywhere else. And they are using all sorts of different elements and creating all sorts of things. And that is stimulating in that it is active. It is, for a lot of kids, meaningful. If it's not, then, they don't have to do it. And it's highly engaging, of course. And the other one, which is particularly good for learning computer skills, which are no doubt going to be important for the future and for now, is Scratch. Now, Scratch is an interactive interface built by MIT, and it is the basics of coding. And so you can basically create a cartoon or a game or something like that that uses the building blocks of if-then statements and things like that for actual coding. And it is very fun and very interesting, and I highly recommend it to anyone. And in terms of toys, there are kits actually, like sort of like DIY kits and toys that are particularly good for learning. And some of the ones that I have come across in my work are Kodo Kids. So if you go to kodokids.com, that's some great stuff. KitHub, kithub.cc is wonderful. And there's this thing called the Turing Tumbler, which is sort of a causality and probability puzzle, which is great, particularly for older kids. And then problem-solving puzzles like tangrams. And I don't know if anyone played this game Rush Hour with little cars that you have to slide. I think it's by this company called Think Fun. That one's great too. It gets kids to think in flexible and active and problem-solving ways. Now, I want to be respectful of our time because I don't remember if this is 1 to 2 or 1 to 2:30, but I could keep going because this is my life's work.
Well, I want to be mindful of your time as well. I know we have some parents who probably have to get back to work as well. But Jacob, this was so informative. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed learning more about how free play and agency, help build a child's motivation to learn, all the different types of, or all the different characteristics that define playful learning. This has been really helpful for me, I'm sure for the other participants as well. And is there anywhere we could go to learn more about your research or to, find other parents' resources? Maybe we can email them out to attendees at the end.
Sure, yeah. If anyone wants to hear more, I'll give Dahlia my NYU email, and I would be happy to point people to other resources, as well as just discuss the work that I was talking about, and send you a lot of the literature that I was referring to.
Great. And we have one last question here from Tracy. She was asking what the Kids Hub app that you mentioned was, and if there are any toys for young kids. Tracy, can you clarify what age ranges you might be referring to?
For 1 to 2 year olds.
1 to 2.
1 to 2-year-olds. So I don't think KitHub has stuff for 1 to 2-year-olds, but their website is designed pretty well for you to find learning goals and things like that. I think it's for a little bit older age range, but yeah, it's KitHub. So I can type it in to the. There you go. I typed it into the chat. So you can explore that, and you can always get ideas from them and sort of tailor them to younger kids. And there are plenty of little fun interactive sort of DIY games for younger children, but it might just not be marketed on KitHub.
We also, on our website, if you guys check out getpresently.com, we have, I think, 2 or 3 different kids gift guides that we posted, and they also do cover 0 to 3, 1 to 2. So you might find some great ideas there as well. Getpresently.com.
I'm going to check that out.
You should. Well, thank you everyone so much. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Really excited to have you all now part of the Presently family. Jacob, thank you so much again for your time and for sharing all of your learnings. I hope everyone has a great start to their Monday. And for those with kids going back to school, congrats on getting your life back just a little bit, having a couple more hours to yourself each day. But yes, best wishes to everyone.